Why did we have to break up after scrolling through old Facebook photos? The laptop snapped shut so hard I thought the screen would crack. Liam's hand was shaking when he pulled it away from me, his knuckles white against the silver case. I'd been scrolling through his old Facebook photos looking for shots from his cousin's wedding. Instead, I'd clicked on an album labeled Summer 2012 because the beach sunset looked pretty. He'd been in the kitchen getting us drinks when I found it. Now he stood frozen in the doorway, water sloshing over the rim of the glass in his hand, staring at me like I'd just uncovered a body. "How much did you see?" His voice came out hoarse and strange. I looked at the closed laptop between us, then back at his face, which had drained of all color. I'd only glimpsed the photo for a few seconds before he'd slammed it shut. A beach, a bonfire, groups of teenagers. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was what he was holding in the photo. I stood up slowly. Liam set the glass down on the coffee table, water splashing onto the wood. He didn't seem to notice. His eyes were locked on me, calculating something. He asked me to sit back down, to let him explain. His voice had changed, gone flat and careful. I asked for the laptop. He moved it behind his back, said we needed to talk first, that I didn't understand what I'd seen, that there was context I was missing. I told him to give me the laptop. He shook his head, said he couldn't do that, said I'd get the wrong idea. I grabbed my phone from the couch. He saw the movement and stepped toward me, asked what I was doing. I said I was leaving. He moved to block the doorway. Not aggressive exactly, but deliberate, solid. Said I couldn't leave until we talked about this, until he made me understand. The apartment suddenly felt smaller. I've been here hundreds of times, slept in his bed, cooked in his kitchen. I felt safe. Now every corner seemed threatening. I asked him to move. He said, please, just listen. That if I went to the police with this, it would ruin his life over nothing. That he didn't do anything wrong. Police. The word hung in the air between us. I asked him what he thought I'd seen. He said it didn't matter. That whatever I thought I saw, I was wrong. That there was an explanation. I asked him to give me the explanation then. He ran his hands through his hair, started pacing, said it was complicated, that he'd made mistakes when he was younger, that everyone made mistakes. I asked what mistakes. What had he done? He said nothing. He hadn't done anything, but he'd been somewhere he shouldn't have been, seen something he shouldn't have seen, and he'd never told anyone because he was scared. I asked what he'd seen. He said he couldn't tell me. Not yet. Not until I promised I wouldn't go to the police. I told him I wasn't promising anything until I knew what we were talking about. He stopped pacing, looked at me with something like desperation, said the photo was from a party in Tahoe in 2012, that he'd been 17, that something bad had happened that night, something that made national news. I asked what happened. He said a girl disappeared, that everyone at the party was questioned, that he'd told the police he didn't see anything, that he'd lied. My chest tightened. I asked what he'd lied about. He said he'd seen things, knew things, but he'd been 17 and terrified, and he'd kept his mouth shut. And now, 12 years later, if that photo got out, people would know he'd been lying, would assume the worst, would destroy his life over something he didn't do. I asked again what was in the photo. He said he couldn't tell me, that I needed to trust him, that we'd been together 2 years and that should count for something. I said trust went both ways, that if he wanted me to trust him, he needed to tell me the truth. He shook his head, said the truth would make me leave, that he couldn't risk that. I walked toward the door anyway. He grabbed my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me, asked where I thought I was going. I pulled away, told him to let me go. He did, stepped back with his hands raised, said he was sorry, that he didn't mean to scare me, that he just needed me to understand before I did something we'd both regret. I asked what I'd regret, going to the police about whatever he was hiding. He said yes, that I'd regret getting involved in something that had nothing to do with me, that happened over a decade ago, that I should just forget I saw that photo and move on. I told him I couldn't do that, not without knowing what it showed. He pulled out his phone, started typing. I asked what he was doing. He said making sure I had incentive to keep quiet, showed me his screen. He'd sent himself a text from my phone. I asked how he had my phone, realized I'd left it on the couch. The text said, if you ever leave me, I'll destroy your life. I'll make up whatever I have to. I felt sick. He'd just manufactured evidence that I was threatening him, that anything I said to police would be revenge for a breakup. I asked him to delete it. He said no, said it was insurance, that as long as I kept quiet about the photo, he'd keep quiet about the message. But if I went to the police, he'd show them, would paint me as an obsessed ex making false accusations. I grabbed my phone from his hand, deleted the message from my side. He said it didn't matter, that he had it on his phone, that he'd already backed it up to the cloud. I walked to the bedroom and grabbed my purse, my overnight bag, started throwing clothes into it. He followed, asked what I was doing. I said leaving, that I couldn't be here anymore. He stood in the doorway watching, said if I left like this, we were done, that he couldn't be with someone who didn't trust him. I told him we were already done, that I couldn't be with someone who'd threaten me, who'd manufacture evidence against me, who'd hide something this serious for 2 years. He said I was being dramatic, that I was throwing away our relationship over nothing. I pushed past him with my bag. He didn't try to stop me this time, just called after me, said I'd regret this, that I had no proof of anything, that the photo would be deleted within the hour, that I'd look crazy if I went to the police with just a story. I walked out without responding, got in my car and drove. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I'd only seen the photo for a few seconds. A beach at dusk, a bonfire, groups of teenagers, and something in the foreground that Liam had been desperate to hide. Something connected to a girl who'd disappeared. Something he'd lied to police about. Something worth threatening me over. I pulled into a parking lot and sat there trying to think. A girl had disappeared from a party in Tahoe in 2012. Liam had been there, had seen something, had lied about it, and there was photo evidence. I pulled out my phone and searched. Typed in, Tahoe 2012 girl disappeared party. The results loaded immediately. Madison Harper, 17 years old. Vanished from a beach party on July 14, 2012. Never seen again. Over 100 people had been at the party. Police had interviewed dozens of teenagers. No one had seen anything useful. The case had gone cold. Her parents still searched for her, still believed someone knew something. I clicked through articles, found photos of Madison. Long brown hair, bright smile. The same age Liam had been. The article said the party had been at a private beach in North Lake Tahoe, that Madison had been drinking, that her friends had lost track of her around 11:30 p.m., that by midnight she was gone, that her phone went dead at 11:52, that she'd never been found. I found the tip line number, stared at it, thought about Liam's threat, about the fake text message, about how it would look if I called, like a bitter ex with an axe to grind. But I also thought about Madison's parents, about 12 years of not knowing, about the photo Liam was so desperate to hide, about his reaction when I'd found it. My phone buzzed. Text from Liam, saying he was sorry, that he loved me, that we could work through this if I'd just come back. Another text, saying he'd delete the fake message if I'd forget about the photo, saying we could both move on. Another, saying the photo was deleted now anyway, that I had no proof, that I should just let it go. I called the tip line, got a voicemail, left a message, said my name, said I'd been dating someone who was at the beach party the night Madison disappeared, said I'd found a photo from that night on his Facebook, said he'd never come forward with information, said he'd admitted to lying to police, left my number, hung up. Then I drove to my apartment. My roommate Zara was at her boyfriend's. I sat on my bed and waited. Hours passed. My phone stayed silent except for more texts from Liam. Apologies mixed with accusations mixed with threats. I didn't respond. A woman identified herself as Detective Chen with the North Lake Tahoe Police Department. She said she'd received my voicemail about the Madison Harper case. My throat went dry as I confirmed it was me. She asked me to tell her more about the photo and my relationship with the person who'd been at the party. I told her everything. About finding the album. About Liam's reaction. About his admission that he'd lied to police. About the fake text message he'd created. About how he'd deleted the photo, but that it might still be on Facebook's servers. About what I'd seen him holding in that brief glimpse before the laptop slammed shut. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she asked if I could come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. She said she needed me to tell her exactly what I'd seen in that photo. I told her he was holding something. My voice shook as I explained. In the foreground of the picture, it looked like a shoe. A single shoe. A brown leather sandal. Another pause. Longer this time. She told me that Madison Harper had been wearing brown leather sandals the night she disappeared. One was found near the waterline. The other was never recovered. The room tilted. I gripped my phone tighter and said I'd only seen it for maybe 2 seconds. But I was sure. He was standing near the bonfire, and he was holding it up like he'd just found it, and he looked scared in the photo. Really scared. She asked what time the photo was taken if I could tell. I said the timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. I remembered because I'd thought it was weird that he looked so upset at what should have been a fun party. Detective Chen's voice changed, became more urgent. She asked for my name. I told her Emma Torres. She said she needed me to be very careful, not to contact Liam again, not to go to his apartment. If he tried to contact me, I shouldn't respond, but I should save everything he sent. She asked if I could do that. I said yes. She told me to come to the station at 10 a.m. and to bring my phone. They were going to see if they could recover that photo. Then she hung up. I sat there in the dark, my hand still clutching the phone. The Madison Harper case had been all over the news in 2012. I'd been in college then, remembered seeing it on CNN. A beautiful teenage girl vanishing from a beach party. Hundreds of kids there, but nobody saw anything. The case went cold within months. Her parents on TV pleading for information, offering rewards, setting up foundations, never giving up hope that she might still be alive somewhere. But I'd seen the look on Liam's face in that photo. The fear, the guilt. He'd known something even then. Had held evidence in his hands and had said nothing. My phone buzzed. Another text from Liam. This one said he'd been thinking about everything. That he realized he'd overreacted. That he wanted to explain properly if I'd give him a chance. That we could meet somewhere public if that would make me feel safer. I didn't respond. Just took a screenshot like Detective Chen had instructed. Saved it to a folder. Then another text came through. This one said he'd talked to his lawyer. That he wanted me to know he was prepared to take legal action if I spread lies about him. That defamation was a serious crime. Another screenshot. I was shaking now. The whiplash between apologetic and threatening. The calculation in every word. How had I not seen this side of him before? 2 years together and I'd thought I knew him. But then he'd been hiding this for 12 years. Since he was 17. He'd gotten good at pretending. I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo. The bonfire. The scared teenagers. Liam's face, pale and terrified, holding up that sandal. Had he just found it? Or had he known where it was? At 3 a.m., my phone rang again. Liam. I didn't answer. He called 4 more times. Then the texts started coming rapidly. He said he knew I was awake, that he could see I'd viewed his messages, that I was being cruel by ignoring him, that after everything we'd been through, I owed him a conversation, that he was parked outside my building and just wanted to talk. My heart was hammered. I got up and went to the window. I looked down at the street. His car was there. Silver Honda Civic, parked under the streetlight. I could see him in the driver's seat, phone glowing in his hand. I called Detective Chen's number. It went to voicemail. I left a message saying Liam was outside my apartment, that he was texting me repeatedly, that I was scared. I gave her my address. Then I called 911, told them my ex-boyfriend was parked outside my building refusing to leave, that he'd been sending threatening messages, that I felt unsafe. The dispatcher said she'd send a unit, asked if I wanted to stay on the line. I said, yes. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. I watched from my window as 2 officers approached Liam's car. He got out. They talked. He gestured toward my building, showed them something on his phone, probably the fake text he'd created, the one that made me look unstable. One of the officers looked up at my building. I stepped back from the window. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered, still on the line with the 911 dispatcher. The police officer identified himself and said they were outside with Liam Monroe. He said Liam had shown them text messages indicating I'd made threats against him, that I was harassing him after a breakup. He asked if I'd like to come down and give my side of the story. I told him no, that I'd called them because Liam was parked outside my building at 3 a.m. after sending me dozens of messages, that I had screenshots of everything, that I was giving a statement to Detective Chen at the North Lake Tahoe Police Department in a few hours, and I didn't want to say anything that might compromise that investigation. There was a pause. The officer asked what investigation. I said I couldn't discuss it, but that Detective Chen's contact information was on the official North Lake Tahoe PD website if they wanted to verify that this wasn't just a relationship dispute. Another pause. Then he said they'd ask Liam to leave the area, that if he came back I should call 911 again. I thanked him and hung up. From the window, I watched the officers talk to Liam again. He looked angry now, gesturing more forcefully, but eventually he got back in his car. The patrol car waited until he drove away, then followed him for a block before turning off in a different direction. I finally hung up with the 911 dispatcher, sat on my bed with all the lights on, watched the clock tick toward morning. At 9:30 a.m., exhausted and running on no sleep, I drove to the North Lake Tahoe Police Department. It was 2 hours away. I'd texted my boss that I had a family emergency and needed the day off. That wasn't exactly a lie. The station was smaller than I'd expected, a square brick building with a parking lot half full of patrol cars. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A receptionist behind glass told me to have a seat, that Detective Chen would be with me shortly. I sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair and waited. 15 minutes later, a woman in her 40s appeared. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She introduced herself as Detective Chen and led me to an interview room. The room was small. Gray walls, a table, 3 chairs, a camera in the corner with a red light that said it was recording. She offered me water. I accepted. She sat across from me and asked me to start from the beginning, to tell her everything about my relationship with Liam, about finding the photo, about what happened afterward. I did. She took notes, asked clarifying questions. Her face remained neutral throughout, giving nothing away. When I got to the part about him creating the fake text from my phone, she leaned forward, asked me to show her. I pulled up the screenshots I'd taken of his messages, the apologies, the threats, the lawyer mention, the messages from 3 a.m. She photographed each one with her phone. Then she asked to see my call log, the dozen calls from Liam through the night. She photographed that too. Then she asked about the photo again, wanted me to describe exactly what I'd seen, every detail I could remember. I closed my eyes and tried to reconstruct it. The beach at dusk, the bonfire blazing, groups of teenagers scattered across the sand, some sitting, some standing. In the middle distance, maybe 20 feet from the fire, Liam stood alone. He was holding something up at shoulder height, a brown leather sandal, the kind with a cork sole and a buckle on the side. His face was clearly visible in the firelight, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, the expression of someone who'd just realized something terrible. She asked if anyone else was looking at him in the photo, if anyone else seemed aware of what he was holding. I said no. Everyone else was focused on the fire or on each other. He was isolated in his moment of realization. She asked if I could see Madison in the photo. I said I didn't know what she looked like then, that I'd only seen recent missing person photos. She pulled out her phone, showed me a picture, long brown hair, heart-shaped face, wearing a white tank top and denim shorts. I closed my eyes again, tried to scan the photo in my memory, said I wasn't sure. There were girls with long brown hair, maybe one in the background near the water, but I'd only had seconds before the laptop closed. She asked about the timestamp again. I confirmed, 11:47 p.m. She made a note, said Madison's phone had pinged a cell tower at 11:52 p.m. for the last time, that her friends had reported her missing around midnight, that the timeline matched. Then she asked if Liam had said anything specific about what he'd seen that night, what he'd lied to police about. I told her no, that he'd refused to give details, only that he'd been somewhere he shouldn't have been, and had seen something he shouldn't have seen, that he'd been 17 and scared and had kept his mouth shut for 12 years. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told me something that made my blood run even colder. They'd suspected from the beginning that someone at the party had picked up Madison's sandal, that whoever took it might have information about what happened to her. But with over 100 kids there, most of them drunk or high, most with no clear memories of the night, they'd never been able to narrow it down. Several kids had mentioned seeing someone holding a shoe near the fire, but descriptions varied. No one could say who it was for certain. The photo, if they could recover it, might be the first concrete evidence they'd had in over a decade. She asked if I knew Liam's Facebook login information. I said no. We'd never shared that. She asked if I knew where he might have backed up the photo. I mentioned that he'd said he'd already backed it up to the cloud, that he'd deleted it within an hour, but that it might still exist somewhere in Facebook's servers or in his cloud storage. She said they'd get a warrant, that it might take a few days, but that what I'd described was enough for a judge to authorize access to his accounts. She asked if I'd be willing to testify if it came to that. I said yes. Then she asked the hard question, whether I thought Liam was capable of hurting Madison, of making her disappear. I sat there trying to reconcile the man I'd loved with the man who'd threatened me the night before, the man who'd manufactured evidence against me, the man who'd hidden this secret for 12 years. I said I didn't know, that 24 hours ago I would have said absolutely not, but now I wasn't sure of anything. She told me they'd be in touch, that I should continue to document everything Liam sent me, that I should not go to his apartment or agree to meet him anywhere, that if he showed up at my place again I should call 911 immediately. She gave me her direct number, told me to call anytime, day or night, if I remembered anything else or if I felt unsafe. I drove home in a daze. The 2-hour drive felt like minutes. My mind kept replaying that photo, that moment. Liam holding up Madison's sandal with that look of dawning horror on his face. What had he seen? What had he done? My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex. Zara, my roommate. She was crying, asking where I was, saying something had happened, that I needed to come home right away but that maybe I shouldn't, that the apartment wasn't safe. I asked what was wrong. She said Liam had been there, that he'd somehow gotten past the building's front door, that he'd knocked on our apartment door saying he needed to talk to me, that when she'd told him I wasn't there, he'd pushed past her into the apartment, started looking through my room. She'd threatened to call the police and he'd left, but not before taking something. My laptop, the one that had been sitting on my desk. I told her to call the police right now, to file a report, that I was 5 minutes away but that she should lock herself in her room until the police arrived. She said they were already there, that our landlord had called them when he saw Liam forcing his way into the building on the security camera. I parked and ran inside. 2 patrol cars out front, officers in the lobby talking to our landlord. Upstairs, Zara was giving a statement to another officer in our living room. She looked shaken, ran to hug me when I walked in. The officer asked me questions. I told him about the breakup, about the missing persons case, about Detective Chen, gave him her number. He stepped out to make a call. Zara whispered that Liam had seemed unhinged, wild-eyed and frantic. He'd gone straight to my room and grabbed my laptop without explanation. She'd asked what he was doing and he'd said he needed to make sure I didn't have any copies of something, that it was none of her business, that I'd stolen something from him and he was getting it back. The officer returned, said Detective Chen had filled him in, that they had an APB out for Liam now, that breaking into the apartment and taking my property constituted burglary. Combined with his behavior outside my building last night, they'd be seeking a restraining order. He asked if I had any other devices Liam might try to access, any other places he might look. I shook my head. My laptop. My phone. That was it. And my phone was with me. But then I remembered. My cloud storage. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, logged into my Google Drive, started searching through my folders. And there it was. In a folder I'd created months ago called Liam Wedding Photos. I'd been collecting photos from his Facebook to put together a slideshow for our anniversary. I'd downloaded dozens of photos, including, I realized with a jolt, several from that summer 2012 album. I'd been scrolling through it on my laptop 2 weeks ago, downloading scenic shots of the beach. I'd grabbed multiple photos before moving on to other albums. With trembling fingers, I opened the folder, scrolled through, beach sunset, bonfire from a distance, group shot of teenagers, and then, there, the photo, the one Liam had been so desperate to hide. I'd downloaded it by accident, hadn't even looked at it closely, had just grabbed a batch of photos because I liked the lighting, but there it was. Timestamp, 11:47 p.m., July 14th, 2012. And there was Liam, young and scared, holding up a brown leather sandal for the camera. I showed the officer. He immediately called Detective Chen back, put her on speaker. I told her I had the photo, that I'd downloaded it weeks ago without realizing, that it was in my cloud storage. She told me not to touch anything else, to send her the link immediately, that this changed everything. Within an hour, Detective Chen arrived at my apartment with 2 other detectives. They took my phone, made copies of everything, photographed my cloud storage, asked me to write down everywhere I'd accessed the photo from, every device, every location. I told them just my laptop and my phone, that Liam now had my laptop, that he might delete the files from it, but that they were still in the cloud, that he didn't have my Google password, that I was changing it right now just to be safe. One of the detectives, an older man who introduced himself as Detective Martinez, asked if he could look at the photo. Detective Chen pulled it up on her phone. We all looked at it together. It was worse than I'd remembered. Clearer. In the full resolution image, you could see everything. Liam in the foreground, that sandal held up high, but in the background, near the waterline, there was something else. A shape. At first glance, it looked like driftwood or a pile of seaweed. But when you zoomed in, when you really looked, you could see it was a person. Someone lying face down in the shallow water where the waves met the sand. Detective Martinez zoomed in further, enhanced the image on his tablet. The person had long brown hair, was wearing what looked like a white tank top. One foot was bare. The other had a brown sandal still attached. We all went silent. After 12 years, here was Madison Harper, in the background of a party photo, lying in the water while everyone else laughed and drank and took pictures. And Liam, 17 years old, standing there holding her missing sandal, knowing something was terribly wrong. Detective Chen said they needed to bring Liam in immediately, that this was now a homicide investigation, that I needed to stay somewhere safe, somewhere he wouldn't think to look for me. Zara offered her boyfriend's place. I packed a bag while the detectives made phone calls. As we were leaving, my phone rang. Liam. I almost didn't answer, but Detective Chen nodded, indicated they wanted to hear what he'd say. She held up her phone to record. I answered, put it on speaker. Liam's voice came through frantic and broken. He said he'd made a terrible mistake, that he shouldn't have taken my laptop, that he was sorry for everything, that he just wanted to talk, to explain properly. I asked where he was. He said he was driving, just driving, that he couldn't think straight, that everything was falling apart. I asked if he'd deleted the photo from my laptop. There was a pause. Then he asked what I was talking about. What photo? I said he knew what photo. The one from the party. The one with Madison. Another pause. Longer. Then his voice changed. Became flat. Cold. He asked if I'd already talked to the police. If I'd already shown them. I didn't answer. He laughed. Bitter and harsh. Said he'd known I would do this. That I'd ruin everything. That I'd never understand that he'd been 17 and terrified and had made a split-second decision that had haunted him every day since. I asked what decision. What had he done? He said nothing. That was the point. He'd done nothing. He'd found her sandal in the sand, had picked it up, had been about to call for help when someone had taken that photo, and then he'd looked toward the water and had seen her there, lying so still, and he'd frozen, had stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, and then he'd panicked, dropped the sandal, walked away, told himself someone else would find her, someone else would call for help. He'd gone back to the party, had tried to act normal, had left with his friends around 1 a.m., and he'd never said anything. I asked if she was already dead when he found her. He said he didn't know, that he'd been too scared to check, that she might have just been passed out, that if he'd helped her right then, she might have lived, or she might have been dead already, and there was nothing he could have done. But he'd never know because he'd walked away. Detective Chen was typing rapidly on her phone, signaling to someone. Through the window, I could see more patrol cars pulling up outside. They were tracing the call, finding him. Liam kept talking, said he'd lived with the guilt for 12 years, had tried to be a good person to make up for it, had told himself it didn't matter now, that Madison was gone and dragging himself down too wouldn't bring her back. But then I'd found that photo and everything had come crashing back. All the fear, all the guilt, all the what-ifs. He said he'd loved me, that I had to believe that, but he'd loved himself more, loved his future more, loved the life he'd built more than he'd loved some dead girl he'd barely known, and he was sorry for that, sorry for everything, but it was too late now. Then he hung up. Detective Chen was already on her radio. Units were converging on Liam's location, wherever he was. I stood there feeling numb. Zara had her arm around me. The detectives were moving quickly, grabbing equipment, heading for the door. Detective Martinez stayed behind with us, said we needed to stay put until they had Liam in custody. That based on what he'd just said, they had enough to charge him with several crimes. Maybe not murder. They'd need to prove Madison was still alive when he found her for that, but definitely involuntary manslaughter if he'd failed to render aid, obstruction of justice for lying to investigators, breaking and entering for my apartment. We waited. Minutes ticked by. My phone buzzed. Text from Liam. Just 2 words. I'm sorry. Then nothing. An hour later, Detective Chen called. Her voice was tight. They'd found Liam's car on the Pacific Coast Highway, pulled off at a scenic overlook. The car was empty. His phone was on the dashboard, his wallet and keys on the passenger seat. There were footprints in the mud leading to the edge of the cliff. Coast Guard had been called. Search and rescue were checking the water below, but the cliff was 200 feet high and the ocean was rough. If he'd jumped, chances were they wouldn't find him for days. If they found him at all. I felt strange. Not quite relief, not quite grief, just exhaustion. Hollow and numb. Liam was gone. Madison had been gone for 12 years, both destroyed by one terrible moment on a beach in 2012. One moment where a scared 17-year-old boy had chosen himself over someone who might have needed help. Detective Chen said they'd keep searching, that they'd release the photo to the media, that Madison's parents deserved to know what had happened to their daughter, even if Liam couldn't tell them himself, that after 12 years they'd finally have some answers. I thanked her and hung up. Zara made tea. We sat on her boyfriend's couch and watched the news. By evening, it was everywhere. The Madison Harper case had been solved. Sort of. A photo had emerged showing the moment someone had found evidence at the party. Police were looking for Liam Monroe for questioning. His car had been found abandoned at a cliff overlook. My phone rang constantly. News outlets, friends, my mother. I ignored them all. Just sat there with my tea going cold, thinking about a girl I'd never met who'd died on a beach 12 years ago, and a man I'd loved who'd spent 12 years lying about it, and a photo I'd downloaded by accident that had revealed everything. 3 days later, they found Liam's body, washed up on a beach 20 miles south of where his car had been found. The medical examiner ruled it suicide, drowning. He'd left no note beyond that final text to me. Madison's parents gave a press conference. They cried, thanked the police, thanked me, though I hadn't done anything except accidentally save a photo. Said they could finally lay their daughter to rest knowing what had happened, that she'd been at a party, had drunk too much, had wandered to the water and had collapsed or passed out or slipped, that she might have lived if someone had helped her right away. But that boy had walked away and she'd drowned in 6 inches of water while a party raged 50 yards away. The autopsy from 2012, when they'd finally found her body a week after she disappeared, had shown water in her lungs, had shown a blood alcohol level of 0.18, had shown a bump on her head consistent with a fall. She'd probably hit her head on a rock, gotten disoriented, laid down in the shallow water and had been too intoxicated to get back up, had drowned there while waves lapped over her face. If Liam had checked on her, if he'd called for help, she might have lived, or she might have been dead already, but he'd never know. And now he never would. I testified at a hearing 6 months later, told them everything, showed them the photo, explained how I'd found it, how Liam had reacted, what he'd admitted. They officially closed the Madison Harper case, ruled her death accidental drowning with failure to render aid as a contributing factor, listed Liam Monroe as the witness who'd failed to act. Case closed. But I still think about it sometimes. About how one photo, one accidental download, one glimpse of something I shouldn't have seen, had unraveled everything, had exposed 12 years of lies, had destroyed 2 lives that were already destroyed the moment Liam had walked away from that beach. And I think about all the other photos out there, all the ones taken at parties. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.